Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Driver Suit Blog Radio. As always, I'm your host, David G. Firestone. I had a lot going on over the last couple of weeks. I've had last-minute friends and family visits, I had to work outside in a massive heat wave, and I had several other things that needed my attention. I needed some time off, so I had to do a fluff piece last week, but this week, things will be back to normal. We're going to start with racing news, and we're going to start with Chicago Street Race winner Shane Van Gisbergen, or SVG. I'll talk about the Chicago Street Race itself next week. I'm waiting for a couple things to play out. But when we last left, he was fresh off his win at the Rainy Street Race and had another race at the Indianapolis Road Course, and there was some debate over whether or not he was going to go to NASCAR or stay at Supercars for 2024. Now, originally he was contracted with 888 Race Engineering in the Australian Supercar Series, but when it comes to his contract, we now have a clearer picture. Because on August 16, there was announced that 888 Race Engineering, which is branded as Red Bull Ampol Racing, signed Will Brown for 2024. Now, this is from an update on J-Ski. I'm going to read this as it's written. 888 Race Engineering is thrilled to announce the signing of Will Brown, who will join Red Bull Ampol Racing from 2024 on a 3-year deal. The 25-year-old is a proven race winner and one of the category's most exciting talents, and the team look forward to celebrating, it should be looks forward, but team look forward to celebrating this exciting new partnership in January 2024. The announcement comes as the team has allowed Shane SVG Van Gisbergen to explore his dreams to race overseas in overseas categories in 2024 and beyond. Well, I mean, the only way to look at that is, well, the deed is done. I mean, how could it not, given that the team that he's currently racing for just gave that status? Now, normally I wouldn't be too thrilled for a driver from another racing category coming into NASCAR. Guys and gals like Danica Patrick and Dario Franchitti and Marcus Ambrose and others. But here, SVG is a good bet. He's shown that he can win. He can win in anything that he's in. He put on a great show in Chicago, and I'm solidly sold on him. And I hope that Trackhouse Racing get a charter for him, because I think they'd be making a giant mistake if they didn't. Now, something else that happened was the start of the NASCAR playoffs, and when I saw this story, I had to do a little looking to see if this was even legal, and apparently it is. At the beginning of the playoffs, Team Penske and the Wood brothers swapped crew chief. The specifics, and according to a tweet from Penske, link in the description, Team Penske plus Wood brothers to trade crew chiefs. Effective immediately for 2023 and 2024, Brian Wilson will serve as the CC crew chief for Austin Cindric in the number 2 Penske Ford Mustang. Jeremy Bullins will serve as the CC for Harrison Burton in the number 21 Wood Brothers Ford Mustang. Now, we've seen these kinds of pit crew moves from within teams. Like, I remember Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson swapped teams at one point. You also can move crew chiefs from one car to another within a team, but this is the first time that I'm aware of where two teams that have no ownership stake in one another swap crew chiefs. Now, granted, there is a technical alliance between the two, but it still doesn't change my confusion as to how this could be allowed. You have one team that is not in the playoffs, one team that is in the playoffs. They have a technical alliance, but they have no ownership within each other. And I think there should be a rule disallowing this. I mean, I understand like the inner team movements, but two completely separate teams swapping crew chiefs at the beginning of the playoffs, that's just no. I mean, there should be a rule clarifying this, but if it's legal, so be it. Now, speaking of rule violations, there were some suspensions in the NASCAR Truck Series as of late, and these prompted a lot of attention. First were the DUI suspension of Truck Series drivers Chris Hacker and Jason White indefinitely. White was specifically cited for violating behavioral sections 2.14a and 4.4d. Now, for those of you who don't know, a 2.14a violation, was for failing to notify NASCAR of his arrest. Hacker was only cited on the 4.4D restrictions. Now, to clarify what a 4.4D rule is, it states that member actions could result in a fine and/or indefinite suspension, or actions which include actions by a NASCAR member that NASCAR finds to be detrimental to stock car racing or NASCAR. Statement or communication made public, including social media platforms, that demeans, criticizes, ridicules, or otherwise disparages another person based on that person's race, color, creed, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, religion, age, or handicapped condition. I hope that they enforce this heavily. Member-to-member confrontations with physical violence, e.g. striking another competitor, and other violent manifestations such as significant threats and/or abuse and/or endangerment. Multiple violations of the Code of Conduct, selling NASCAR single event credentials, VIP passes, essential work passes, etc., being charged with or convicted of significant criminal violations, e.g. domestic violence, trafficking, assault, or having had determinations rendered criminal or civil or having determinations rendered by criminal or civil authorities that in NASCAR's judgment necessitate action. NASCAR will not prejudge guilt or innocence in the criminal or civil legal system or the guilt and innocence of the member, but rather review each matter in its own context and circumstances with regards to potential effects of the sport. Violations of NASCAR's sports gambling policy. And Rule 0.24a, I'm just going to read that one. Any NASCAR member charged with any violation of the law, misdemeanor and/or felony shall notify NASCAR, which is what Jason White failed to do. Now then, after all of that, after the Milwaukee race, there were some more penalties of note. The most egregious one being Thor Sport Racing, because NASCAR officials issued L2 penalties Tuesday to Thor Sport Racing for infractions at the Milwaukee Mile. The number 18 was found in violation of sections 14.16.1, it's really, really late, and 14.16.1.A and C of the NASCAR rulebook, which deals with wheels, tires, and the wear assembly. This is all according to JC, by the way, specifically the valve stems. As a result, the organization and driver Time and Jesse were each docked 75 points, 5 playoff points in their respective standings, and crew chief Joe Shear Jr. was fined $25,000 and suspended for the next 4 Craftsman Truck Series events through Homestead on October 21st, which is the next to the last race of the season. Competition officials also announced that Aaron Wolf has been suspended indefinitely for a behavioral infraction. He's listed as a hauler driver for the Tricon Garage number 15, and he's in the truck series from the start of the season through the August 11th race. He was found in violation of a 4.1 substance abuse policy, which and 10.1a, which covers actions detrimental to stock car racing, though I was not able to find what specifically he had been using to get suspended. There's one last suspension that I have to talk about. A guy by the name of Joel Courage, who I hope is never allowed in a NASCAR facility again for the rest of his life. So this is from an article by Kenwin Karana on Greensboro.com, link in the description. According to this article, Courage was convicted of 14 sex offenses in Sacramento, California back in 2008. He had apparently registered as a sex offender in Guilford County Sheriff's Office, North Carolina in 2008, but according to the Sheriff's Office, Courage did not inform authorities about several social media accounts that he had, and that counts as a failure to register under state law. Now that sounds kind of bad, it is, but it gets worse, because his place in NASCAR is even crazier. According to a press release from the above-mentioned Sheriff's Office, quote, Courage was operating E33 Motorsports and Development. The business helps find and develop young drivers for growing NASCAR and International Motorsports Associated teams, according to the release. I looked this up, and I can say this. I can say without a shred of doubt that Joel Courage should stay in jail. He should never be released, and he should never be allowed anywhere near a NASCAR facility for the rest of his life. I'm going to link his sex offender registry in the description, but I'm going to warn you, it's a tough read. He was convicted of 14 different offenses, all with someone under the age of 18. Scum like this, they don't deserve to call themselves human. They're just shit. And anybody who sexually abuses a child deserves the worst the American prison system can possibly offer, and I hope this sack of shit gets it. Okay. You need to calm down after this one because I gotta talk about AEW again for the next 2 segments, so I'll be right back. Welcome back. Now, for those of you who haven't figured this out quite yet, yes, I'm a wrestling fan. I mean, yeah, we get it. Wrestling is fake. It's not like Game of Thrones is an award-winning documentary on life in the medieval era. Now, for those of you who don't understand how anyone could be a wrestling fan in this day and age, the action in the ring is entertaining, but the bullshit that goes on behind the scenes is just as, if not more, entertaining. So I got a couple of wrestling stories going on, and we're going to feature WWE in a rare story here, because recently a deal was reached with the WWE and the NFL to create a series of NFL-themed title belts to be sold on WWE Shop and Fanatics. Links in the description. Now, if you're a wrestling fan and you know wrestling, you immediately know that there's going to be an issue. If not, let me explain. So, there's a promotion out there called AEW, which is a quote-unquote competitor to WWE. Now, I'm being generous with the term competitor because WWE have, over the last few years, completely dismissed them as a threat to their existence, and justifiably so. Look at WWE's viewership numbers, attendance numbers, Nielsen numbers, and it's clear that AEW is not a threat to WWE. Well, AEW is owned by Tony Khan, who is an executive with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Jaguars are owned by Tony Khan's father, Shad Khan. I think that's how you pronounce it. So with that little bit of info in your hand, now you understand the dynamic in play. Well, it really didn't take all that long for things to go off the rails, because once this whole thing was announced and the deals went up for sale on the WWE website, the number of teams quickly went from 32 to 31. The one missing team, you guessed it, the Jacksonville Jaguars. This does not go unnoticed by the wrestling public, but I do agree with the move here. Now, let's be honest, Tony Khan is a real piece of work, and we'll get to that in the next segment, but I'm actually surprised that the Jaguars title was made at all, given the ownership. And the other thing is, this title was also announced by WWE. I mean, how in the world did he get to a design point, let alone WWE announcing it? It's kind of amazing, because if you know WWE, they have a very, very good legal department and are well known for doing their due diligence, and somehow or other, they still allowed this to go through. Well, I did a look in both WWE and Fanatics, and it reveals that neither had the Jaguar title belts for sale. Surprise, surprise. Now, I would end it here, but the Fanatics Twitter account in a stunning display of stupidity, when asked why there was no Jacksonville Jaguars title belts, tweeted the following. And I know it's called X. I'm still calling it tweeting. I don't care. Quote, "Hey there, those sold faster than we could have ever imagined. I would keep your eyes peeled for a restock in the next few days." End quote. I've linked the tweet in the description. Read the replies. They are hilarious. Well, I mean, that was some time ago. Nothing has come of it, so I'm going to say the deal is dead, and I can't say that I'm shocked. Now, I said that we're going to talk about him more in the next segment, but we do need to talk about Tony Khan to set up all the craziness that's going on in the next segment. If you ever want a perfect example of why you never put the nice guy in charge, Tony Khan is the perfect example. Because, to paraphrase Colin Cowherd, everybody loves the guy or the gal with the mean people suck bumper sticker and the smiley face buttons and the bowl of candy on their desk, but more often than not, they never matter. You need a tough boss because they have to make the hard decisions and fire people. If there's a fight in the hallway or all hell breaks loose, the nice guys are the ones hiding under their desks or in the closet. So AEW is not in a good state right now. I think a lot of people who aren't AEW marks can agree with me on that. But the reason that he's allowed AEW to get to the state that he's at is because he's too frickin' nice. He literally gives the wrestlers free reign and creative control to do as they please. And as a result, AEW has what many consider to be one of the most chaotic and confusing TV shows. Not just wrestling shows. TV shows that I've ever seen. And I've seen Vince Russo era WWE, TNA, and WCW booking, and it's actually worse. I can't even say it's almost as bad, it's worse. Now, say whatever you want about WWE and Vince McMahon, and a lot has been said, but the way the two companies are being run, it's like night and day. WWE is a very well-oiled machine. Everything happens for a reason. The shows are easy to follow. There's a decent amount of harmony backstage, and everything works the way that it should. AEW is a poorly built machine which is coming apart at the seams. The shows are oddly put together with no real flow. See the August 16th episode of AEW Dynamite. I'll talk about that more in the next segment. Things seem to change from week to week, if not happening at random, and the amount of injuries and botches that happen in AEW is amazing, to the point that there are many who are shocked that an on-screen fatality hasn't happened yet. But Tony Khan does have one major problem, and this is a problem that mirrors Dixie Carter's problem when she was running TNA/Impact Wrestling. They're both fanatically loyal to the wrong people. With Dixie Carter, she was so loyal to Vince Russo as a writer that it cost Impact Wrestling a major TV deal with Spike TV. And that TV show, by the way, was doing better numbers at its end than AEW is in the last 3 years. That's a story that I would have to. I'm gonna do Vince Russo later this year, so I'll mention that when I talk about him. But in contrast to this, Tony Khan is fanatically loyal to a small group of wrestlers, all of whom are trying to be his friends while at the same time focusing on their careers as opposed to doing what's best for AEW, whether it being making the company money or bringing in fans. These wrestlers include, but are not limited to, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Chris Jericho, Orange Cassidy, and Jack Perry. Pay attention to that last one. Now, we saw this in full effect with the CM Punk locker room incident in October of last year. I discussed this on the June 16th episode 75, link in the description. Please pause this and go listen to that episode for context and then come back. Ready? Good. At the end of the rant, I said, Punk is returning tomorrow night despite the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Chris Jericho all harboring ill will towards him. Those who caused the problems were exonerated and the real victim took all the official blame. The question is, why is CM Punk so insistent given all the issues in question? That's the million-dollar question. Punk has little, if any, reason to return. Why is this? Well, since most of the officials in AEW don't really want him there, he has little reason to trust them at all. And despite the ratings boost and fan attention it will bring, it's not a good move at all on Punk's side. I don't see this working out well for Punk. He's 44 years old, he's had a slew of injuries, the people who screwed him are all still there and in positions of power, so what's the upside for Punk here? I mean, yeah, it might be his last one in wrestling, but he's running in a company that is known for being a shit show with a lot of serious botches and numerous injuries. The axe is going to fall. It's not a question of if, but when. And as much as he wants to do business, he should really just cut his losses at this point. And there's also, apparently at that time, were measures in place to keep talent from walking out during his return. Some runs aren't just worth it. Well, this shit blew up. I'm kind of surprised it took this long for it to blow up, but shit finally blew up in his face. On episode 84, I discussed CM Punk and Jack Perry and the conflict they had, and afterwards, somehow things managed to get worse. How so? Well, we'll find out after the break. Welcome back. So when last we left, there was a confrontation between CM Punk and Jack Perry during AEW Collision. So we fast forward to AEW All In at Wembley Stadium in London, England. Now, no one can argue that AEW royally messed up the build to All In, but it actually was a decent event, especially because they had a very hot crowd. But afterwards, nobody was talking about the in-ring action given what's taken place behind the scenes. Now, I have to clarify something before we start. I'm going to get flack from people saying, well, you're 100% on Punk's side. Let me be clear. I hate CM Punk. The guy obviously has some psychiatric issues. He's got a massive ego, even for professional wrestling where massive egos are the norm. WWE Hall of Famer Rob Van Dam thinks that Punk truly believes himself to be the best in the world. I agree with that statement. Punk is the kind of guy who thinks he's the best, he thinks he's in charge of everything, he lets his ego run his entire life, and he's not able to handle not getting his way sometimes. Now, in wrestling, you're not going to get your way all of the time. I get that. But he's not as powerful as he thinks he is, no matter where he goes, which I'll discuss soon. But above and beyond that, I'm not going to make Punk out to be perfectly innocent because his ego and his mouth and his attitude did cause a lot of problems. Now, even before All In, there were problems with Punk because CM Punk wanted to have a meeting between the Elite, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, as well as a few other people to clear the air over what happened back in October of last year. So there was a meeting set up in Atlanta prior to All In, but the Elite canceled at the very last minute. Now again, the Elite are a huge part of the reason Punk was in this debacle, and their AEW's legal team is on their side because they're EVPs and Punk is not. So again, the issues were going to be hashed out in a meeting, but that meeting gets canceled. So Punk, rather than just go straight to Wembley, decides to take a day and stay with his wife and his dog before going to London. I think that was a dumb move for reasons that are about to become clear. So rather than arrive in London the day before the event, he arrives the day of the event. The car service that was supposedly in place, the guy in charge is a Young Bucks fanboy. Because again, Tony Khan has no idea what he's doing when it comes to running a wrestling show. He couldn't get I don't know how Uber works in London, but he couldn't get an Uber to save his own life. So he had to travel to his hotel and then Wembley via the tube, which, when you have a giant influx of people for a major wrestling show, is a lot easier said than done. I believe there were actually over 80,000, 81,000 some odd people there for the event. So he had to travel to his hotel and then the event via the tube, and fans had to help him because he got lost. And this is critical to what's about to play out because a combination of frustration, arrogance, and jet lag is about to manifest itself. Now, if you're not watching WWE pay per views, um, you understand that the pre show on the WWE network is just basically an hour of people sitting at a desk talking to each other. There's no real matches or anything. It's just you just have to watch, Booker T and a group of other people talk about who they think is going to win. With traditional pay-per-views, it's much different because there is a pre-show, but they're going to give matches away to entice you to buy the pay-per-view. I'm going to tell this story real quick. This is how I got into wrestling. It was the night of Bash at the Beach, 1996, WCW. We had a glitch in our cable system where we tried to unlock one pay-per-view, but because of a glitch out of our control, we unlocked all of them, and all we had to do was just call up and say, "Hey, we got charged," and they would just take the pay-per-views off the bill. So this particular night, my parents were going to like a wedding or something. My sister was going out with friends. I didn't have anything to do. I'm like, maybe there's a boxing pay-per-view on, and I was flipping through the channels and I came across a tag team match. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but this was actually two of the best real life brother old school tag teams. I was watching the Steiner brothers versus Harlem Heat. And I'm like, okay, I'll check this out. And I was hooked, and I've been hooked. But yeah, the idea of giving away a few matches to whet the appetites of people who might be just flipping through and maybe see it on social media or whatever. It's a good move. But in this particular situation, the last of the free giveaway matches was Jack Perry losing the FTW title to Hook in an FTW rules match, which is basically no disqualification, lazy booking. Thank you, Jim Cornette. Now, one part of the match featured a spot where a car window got broken. Now, as you recall, uh, Jack Perry and Punk had an altercation about using real glass. So Perry proceeds to look into the camera and go, "It's real glass, cry me a river." This was a clear shot at CM Punk, and he saw it because CM Punk's at gorilla position because the first match on the actual pay-per-view is going to be CM Punk versus Samoa Joe for the quote-unquote real world championship, which was the AEW championship that Punk never lost following the locker room fight. Now, since the two were in gorilla position, which is a staging area near the entrance which was named after Gorilla Monsoon, Punk saw and heard the comment. Punk and Perry had another physical altercation, but this one, however, spilled into the area where Tony Khan was working on the show, knocking over monitors. Supposedly there was also a confrontation between Punk and Tony Khan, as well as Punk and Miro. After his match, Punk then left Wembley Stadium on his all accord. Now for the fallout. It should be noted that due to all of the havoc surrounding the story, I waited several days for events to play out prior to recording this segment. At the time of recording, Punk has not issued a statement, and I'm running out of time to record, so I'm recording it when I can. So many things happened in such a short time that I needed time for all of this to play out. When I first heard about it, when I first heard about everything that was going on, and I mean everything, I thought this was not going to go well. This was like when it was announced that Lindsay Lohan would be playing Liz Taylor in Liz and Dick. It was an entertaining train wreck if that train wreck was carrying a load of burning dumpsters. So, in the aftermath of Punk and Perry's actions forced AEW's hand, and after all in, Punk and Perry were suspended. Now, this move comes in a week where the next 4 events, AEW Dynamite, AEW Collision, AEW Rampage, and AEW All Out, were in Punk's hometown of Chicago, which they heavily used in the branding and the sales points. Now, it should also be noted that All Out was the second AEW pay-per-view in 2 weeks. And that in and of itself, I mean, you have one of the biggest and most critical AEW pay-per-views in all of AEW's history, and then literally 7 days later, you have a second pay-per-view. Well, September 2nd, 2023 was a day that will live in infamy because around the middle of the day, as I was finishing the original script for this segment, AEW released CM Punk from his contract. Now, I thought suspending him prior to 4 events in Chicago was a terrible move. But this was so much worse. Now, on the day that Punk was released, there were 2 statements put out by AEW. The following is what was put on their Twitter page. I'm not calling it X. Go fuck yourself. Statement from All Elite Wrestling and Tony Khan. AEW Wrestling has terminated the wrestler and employment agreements between Phil Brooks (CM Punk) and AEW with cause effective immediately. The termination was confirmed today by Tony Khan, CEO, General Manager, and Head of Creative at AEW. The termination follows a week-long internal investigation of an incident occurring backstage at AEW All In on London on Saturday, August 27th. Following the investigation, the AEW Discipline Committee, it's like the North Korean Committee on Human Rights. You can talk about it all you want, it doesn't exist. Anyway, the AEW Discipline Committee met and later convened with outside legal counsel before making a unanimous recommendation to Khan that Punk be terminated with cause. Phil has played an important role within AEW, and I thank you for his contributions. The termination of his AEW contracts is ultimately my decision and mine alone. Of course, I wish I didn't have to share this news, which may come as a disappointment to many of our fans. Nevertheless, I'm making the decision in the best interest of the many amazing people who make AEW possible every week, our talent, staff, venue operators, and many others whose efforts are unsung but essential to bringing our fans great shows on television and at arenas and stadiums throughout the world. Now, Tony Khan made a televised statement prior to AEW Collision. I recently saw the TV numbers. Somewhere over 500,000 people started watching the broadcast, and as soon as Tony Khan finished talking, 89,000 of them said screw this and left, and the rest of the broadcast lost about 200,000 people over the course of 2 hours. Now, I was not watching this live as there was better wrestling, namely a WWE pay-per-view, but I'm going to recite what Tony Khan said in front of, on camera. Quote, I had to make one of the toughest decisions of my professional career. Today I terminated Phil Brooks for cause. This stems from a backstage incident at AEW All In last Sunday. The incident was regrettable and it endangered people backstage. That includes production staff, the people who help with the show every week, innocent people who had nothing to do with it. I've been going to wrestling shows for over 30 years. I've been producing them on this network for nearly 4 years. Never in all that time have I ever felt until last Sunday that my security, my safety, my life was in danger at a wrestling show. I don't think anybody should feel that way at work. I don't think the people I work with should feel that way. And I've had to make a very difficult choice today, but it came at the recommendation of a discipline committee here in AEW, as well as outside legal counsel, who demanded a unanimous recommendation. I have followed up on that recommendation. I'm sorry to any fans who are upset by this. I'm sorry to anybody who is upset by this. Despite that, we're going to have a great show tonight on Collision, which few, if any, people saw, and we're going to have a great AEW All Out pay-per-view tomorrow in Chicago. Spoiler alert, not even true, not even close to being true. Last weekend was the greatest weekend in AEW history. This is the greatest week in AEW history. We're going to continue that momentum here on Collision and tomorrow night on All Out PPV. I think Jim Cornette's tweet on Tony Khan's statement is the most apt take I've heard on all of this. Because Jim Cornette tweeted out, quote, "I've been involved in a business filled with exaggeration and hyperbole for almost 50 years, and I have never heard a single line of dialogue containing a more stunning, awe-inspiring, metric fuck ton of unadulterated bullshit in my life as I heard uttered tonight. Hashtag scared for his life." Oh, the response to this debacle was swift, to say the least. To say the fans were pissed is a colossal masterpiece of understatement. AEW might not want to run Chicago for a while, given this whole sequence of events, and that sucks because Chicago was one of their hottest markets. Hell, Chicago might not be a racing market, but holy hell, is it a professional wrestling market? You know what? AEW wouldn't even exist if All In, the original All In, hadn't taken place in the Chicago area in 2018. They've just ruined their fan base in Chicago, possibly permanently. So, AEW All Out at the United Center came and went. It was a mad pay-per-view to say the least. But as Tony Khan is wont to do, there was a media scrum after the event. Now, the media scrum is a fancy term for Khan allowing all of his AEW friendly news outlets to ask questions of the wrestlers at the event. It was noted also that a lot of people backstage were told not to discuss CM Punk, and I frankly don't even blame AEW for doing that. So Khan was invariably asked about CM Punk, and he says, and I quote, "I don't want to discuss the terms of the separation in that sense. I think it's best to say, first of all, I very much want to thank CM Punk, Phil, for everything he did for AEW as a wrestler. But I don't think it was an easy decision for anybody on the discipline committee or for the outside counsel or for me to do something like that. I do think it was the right move, and as far as what's going to happen in the future, I can't speak for that, but I'm not the attorneys who interpret all the language and stuff." Okay, Tony. Humorous. Who is on the discipline committee? Who is the outside legal counsel? And I ask this because you have an established history of sham investigations. Remember, I discussed this with CM Punk before, where you had the incident All Out, and then you had the quote-unquote investigation. Who conducted it was never discussed, and it was entirely spent, and the entire thing was there to give the guilty exoneration, and the innocent got screwed over. So when you say, who is the discipline committee, I think we need to know. But we're moving on, because later on he was asked about disciplinary measures against Jack Perry. In, again, another stunning bit of, his total lack of self-awareness, which is kind of stunning that someone like that would have this. But on Jack Perry, Tony Khan said he's been suspended indefinitely. We suspended everybody in that investigation. Then we took further action after that based on what happened and came out of the investigation. But as for Jack, we've suspended Jack as a participant in an incident backstage, and Jack hasn't been around, but that's all I can say about it. But at the time, we did suspend him, and he hasn't been at AEW since All In backstage in London. Okay, again, I'm not 100% on Punk's side. I don't like him on a personal level, and I'm not saying he's free of guilt for some of the things that have happened in AEW. But I think it's also fair to say that CM Punk does have issues. On his podcast, Kevin Nash, former WWE and WCW champion, had a good take on the Punk situation when he said, quote, "Honest to God, I mean, this is, in all seriousness, what I take from this whole thing is that he needs serious help. He needs mental help. When it becomes destructive, there's a chance that this costs you millions of dollars, and you continue to push and push and push. They had to let him go. I'll tell you right now, man, if I would have broken in and saw some motherfucker doing that shit, I would have said, well, if he can get away with it, well, fuck, then I'm going to do it." I just think that Tony Khan needs to get somebody there to be the heater. He needs to bring somebody in. If Vince wouldn't put up with that shit, it's disrespectful to Tony. To me, Punk is almost a bully at this point because he knows that Tony is not. That's just not in his DNA. End quote. Yeah, I mean, given some of the things that have happened with Punk over the years, whether it be in WWE, whether it be in AEW, Punk can be a bully if he feels that he can be. But there's other factors at play here. Now, what's going to happen with AEW Collision? Collision is their Saturday night show, and it was greenlit with Warner Brothers Discovery specifically wanting CM Punk to be a part of that show. It was part of the pitch from all involved. With the singular talent the network specifically demanded for the show gone, how much longer can Collision survive? As I discussed the viewership for that particular episode, I've seen the viewership numbers. They're not great, but they are a hell of a lot better with Punk than without them. Again, question needs to be asked. Without Punk, can Collision survive much longer? But you know what? And again, we're going to talk about Tony Khan because I said this before. He's loyal to the wrong people. Punk is gone and Perry is still there is proof that Tony Khan puts his friends over his business interests. Show me a universe where Jack Perry can draw more money than Tony Khan. Go ahead. I'll wait. Oh, that's right. It doesn't exist. See, Perry is Tony's friend, which is why Jack Perry is still there. Punk wasn't Tony's outside friend, so he's gone. And I'm trying my hardest to understand how a business owner can be so myopic that he puts his friends over the best interests of his business every single time. Again, Tony Khan is not the guy you need in charge of a wrestling company. If he wants to own it and hire people who know what the hell they're doing, I would support it. But you don't want to put the nice guy in charge of the department. Because if a fight breaks out in the hallway, the boss has to break it up. And when you have a nice guy, sometimes they're just hiding under their desks. Tony Khan is the nice guy in this situation. So what's next for CM Punk? Well, that is much, much, much murkier. Where Punk is going to go next is up for debate. Now, first off, we don't know if there's a non-compete at play. I think that would be a very fair assessment because when contracts end at wrestling companies, especially WWE, there's a non-compete for some time. Now, with that said, I think Punk to WWE is almost completely out of the picture. There's too much animosity between the two parties. And seriously, when Vince McMahon claims he cannot do business with somebody, that says a lot. Vince can build or rebuild bridges with people like Jeff Jarrett, Eric Bischoff, and Scott Steiner, who all tried to screw him royally. But if he can't build a bridge with CM Punk, that says a lot. Ring of Honor is now owned by AEW, so they're out. The only option left would be Impact. But Impact is not nearly on the financial level of WWE or AEW, so I don't know where he's going. This is probably the end of his career, to be sincerely honest with you. In short, AEW has an ostrich egg worth of egg on their faces right now. And while I'm done for now, more will happen, and I'll talk about it when it does. And with that, episode 86 has run its course. I will see you next week with episode 87. I'm Dave Farsley. If you like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.